I'm going to take my text from Isaiah chapter 5 and verse 20. Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Then verse 23, which justify the wicked for reward and take away the righteousness of the righteous from him. This message is being recorded, and it will be played on the radio and also on TV. And I felt that it was my duty this morning, in view of the developments of this past week, especially in the Soviet Union and in Russia. You're all aware of them, I'm sure. You've been following them very closely, I know. I wonder how many present here in the assembly this morning has heard any of my broadcasts this week. Would you lift your hands? There's 2, 3, 4, 5, I see 6, 7 of you. That's all. 8 of you. Well, I spent most of the week on the broadcast dealing with these startling and tremendous developments that took place in the Soviet Union. And as I saw things unfold, I realized that the things that we have stood for through these years were coming to the fore, and that we were being vindicated in instance after instance. As it is at this time, a coup that lasted about 3 or 4 days was overturned in a very dramatic providential stand face-to-face there in Moscow. And virtually all the men that Gorbachev had appointed to work with him, the head of the KGB and others, conspired, 8 of them, to throw him out and turn Russia back to what they call the hardliners. And they had control of the army and of the communist KGB. They had the old line in their hands. And at first it looked like the gains that had been made and the changes that had been taking place, including the tearing down of the Berlin Wall, that a lot of these things would be changed. And I was one of those that spent time praying that this could be overturned and that there could be an opening in the Soviet Union which would enable liberty to come back. I prayed for that. Now to you people who are listening, and especially those of you who've come into my church these last 30 years, 35 years, a lot of this will be news to you. But I must keep you abreast of these developments. As you know, our issue in the Christian world was our Board of Foreign Missions. And the Board of Foreign Missions was sending out missionaries, especially to China, that were teaching communism. Our board was formed, independent board, because we couldn't support that. But there was a leadership in that board that definitely was sympathetic to the communists. And in the providence of God, I started this broadcast of ours in March of 1956, the 20th Century Reformation Hour. We had just had an ICC Congress in Faith Seminary in 1954, and the World Council had had a big meeting in Chicago in 1954, and the issue with them was that they were bringing over as delegates from these communist countries churchmen who were appointed by the government, by the communist government. We'd made a very big issue of it at that time, and it had been picked up in Congress, and some of the congressmen were telling them the World Council shouldn't have certain men from Hungary and other countries admitted. Well, they let them in, but restricted their travel. But the issue in 1954 with the WCC in Chicago and the ICC here was the fact that the communists had their hands in the resolutions and influenced, came out in favor of peaceful coexistence and all of these things with the communists. It wasn't until 1956 or 1956 that I got the courage to start another broadcast. We call it the 20th Century Reformation Hour. Now, beloved, in 1956, the leaders of the National Council in my country had been having their contacts with the churchmen in Russia, all of whom were under the control of the KGB and the Communist Party, all of them. And it was in April of 1956 that the National Council sent a delegation to Moscow to meet with these churchmen, all of whom were under the control of the KGB run by the Communist Party. We opposed that. They went over in the interest of understanding, over in the interest of what they call peace. But they arranged for the second-ranking churchman of Moscow, the Russian Orthodox Church, to come over here for an exchange visit into the United States. That was widely publicized in the press and everywhere. And they told us that they were going to bring Metropolitan Nikolai. That was his name. Here's the Moscow Patriarch under the control of the KGB. Here was a second-ranking man coming over here. Now, he had made some terrible speeches against the United States and our men, our soldiers in South Korea and all of that. And in anticipation of his coming, I got busy with some of our other brethren, and we organized 4 large rallies in this country to protest the National Council bringing over a KGB agent to promote the cause of peace. We had a rally in New York in Carnegie Hall. We packed it out. We had a rally here in Philadelphia in the convention center out here. I have the picture here. It was practically filled. We had hundreds of people there. We went to Orchestra Hall in Chicago on Michigan Avenue. We packed it out. We went to the Shrine Auditorium in Los Angeles. We packed it out. But that was in 1956. These rallies were held in advance of the arrival in this country of Metropolitan Nikolai from Moscow. We prepared the country for it, but I must tell you, we didn't get any news coverage of these meetings. They were very effective. And where you and I came in, we took over 200 people from this church alone over to Independence Square the day that Nikolai arrived, and he went in and put his hand on our Liberty Bell and talked about freedom. We didn't get any publicity on that either, but we were there. And Dr. Blake, the president of the National Council of Churches, escorted Nicodemus into the Independence Hall. I think of George Washington going in there, but I don't think of Nikolai going in there. But he did it. He got tremendous coverage by the Associated Press saying that there was full religious liberty and that he'd never prayed for Stalin and all these various things about what a wonderful Christian church the Russian Orthodox Church was, but it was under the total control of the KGB. Now, in that connection, the men down in Washington, and I was in touch with some of these men down in Washington, both the House Committee on Un-American Activities and the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee. The Senate Committee had a former KGB officer who had defected, and they had a hearing with him, and in that hearing he identified the Russian Orthodox Church is under the control of the KGB, of which he had been a part. And here he talks, this man who came, Peter Daryabin, about this man, Nikolai. Let me read you. Another example was in 1956 when the Soviet religious delegation was here, the Russian Orthodox Church. The chief of that was Archbishop Nikolai. He is not a member of the KGB, but he is an agent of the KGB. Since World War II, he gives information to the KGB. KGB is asking him to give information. He is actually a KGB agent, an agent of the Soviet secret police. And early this week, as you know, we saw the pictures. These Russians went in front of the KGB big headquarters where they had a statue of the man that organized the KGB, and they tore the thing down and carted it off. We all saw that. So here was a Senate internal subcommittee seeking to alert the American people to the fact that this man, brought over by the National Council of Churches, was serving the secret police of the Soviet Union. Now, the House Committee on Un-American Activities, and I was in touch with some of these men at that time, they also brought for their investigation another one of the KGB agent, and this man's name was Yuri Rostorov. Peter Deryabin was with the Senate, and Yuri Rostorov was with that. I went down for this hearing, and as he was examined before the House, he was asked, when the government permitted the Orthodox Church to operate more freely, the church organized seminaries, I think, one or two and a couple of people, not a couple of people, but many people from MVD headquarters were sent to the seminaries as students. Were they sent as students or sent to superintend the students? Rostorov, no, they sent officers, counterintelligence officers to these seminaries, and later they became bishops in many churches in the Soviet Union. Now he goes on with lengthy testimony with all of this. Rostorov, yes, the church, the so-called liaison, the officer between church and government, but practically they keep the church under complete control. And he's speaking of Metropolitan Nikolai. He is the chairman of the religious committee, simultaneously became practically speaking, working with the MVD in all activities, Now here is the Senate committee of my country. Here's the House committee, both of them in 1956, at the time when this man was coming over here. And they prepared the country for the fact that he was an agent. But this was never published. I published it in the Christian Beacon, but it was not published across the country. It's interesting, I think, that all this took place in 1956, and then I have here a report of a big ad that was put in the Washington Post in December 1959. And here is an ad calling for the abolition of this House Un-American Activities Committee. And who do you think signed it? Eugene Carson Blake, Reinhold Niebuhr, Eleanor Roosevelt, Johnny Mackay. Here's your liberal group, those tied in with the National Council, now saying, get rid of that House committee that exposed these men as agents of the KGB. And they succeeded. They got rid of it. But this was only the beginning of 35 years of this type of activity on the part of the National Council of Churches here in our country. They not only brought over Nikolai, but they brought over Nikolai. They brought on the Baptist over. And during those years, beloved, I published scrapbooks. I have about 20 of them. Here's one on Metropolitan Nikolai that I published. We gave them away by the hundreds. And by the way, I'm about out of this. And if any of you people have a Nikolai scrapbook at home, would you please bring it back and let us have it? Because we've got tremendous use for it now, especially in putting it in the hands of the right kind of people here in our country. Now there's published over in the Soviet Union the Journal of the Moscow Patriarch. And in that Journal of the Moscow Patriarch, we have some speeches by this man, Nikolai, that they brought over here. And would you like to just read just a little speech here? Hitler and his servants might well have envied General MacArthur and his fellow champions in the Korean aggression. He thought that MacArthur was worse than Hitler. And then speaking of our soldiers, for the purpose of annihilating the population, the American criminals, that's our soldier boys, they kill 200 to 400,000 persons. The civilized savages, that's our American soldiers, arrange shooting matches with living targets, binding peasants to posts with barbed wire, and shooting each one of them over the heart of the target, reviving the custom of the young fascist, young Yankees, photographed these scenes for their family. Now here is 3 pages of a vicious attack out of the Moscow Patriarch by this man Nikolai that was brought over here by the National Council of Churches. Now, beloved, I just gave you that sequence of events at that time, at the beginning, to let you see the nature in which the media covered this, reported their activities, but not our activities. The fact and way in which the country was conditioned for this peace offensive. They came over here as emissaries of peace and understanding. And in all those years, right on down, the National Council of Churches brought various delegations over. The next man that followed Nikolai was Nicodemus, and we had all manner of problem with him. Nicodemus spoke beautiful English. He'd graduated from their seminary, but he became the second-ranking churchman who followed this man. And Nicodemus then came over here a number of times. And every time he arrived, we were out to meet him. We met him at Kennedy Airport a couple of times. We met him in York, Pennsylvania. We met him in Chicago. We went with our groups everywhere, and I had these radio stations that enabled me to get through to these various people. But Nicodemus came back and forth, and he told the American people that we should get out of the Vietnam War, which we eventually did. Nicodemus was the man in 1961 when the Russian Orthodox Church, under the control of the KGB, was finally made a member of the World Council of Churches. I was in New Delhi. I was there at the time. We made a big issue of it. We picketed and demonstrated, but there was no report of our activities. But Nicodemus came in. They immediately put him on the Central Committee and the Executive Committee, and they made him chairman of the Credentials Committee, that every church that came in would have to go through his hands before they could get recommendation to be a member of the World Council of Churches. Now, Nicodemus is a man that we put several scrapbooks on. We fought him here. We fought him in various places where he went around the world. And as you know, in 1975 in Kenya, Nairobi, he was made a president of the World Council of Churches. He too had been identified under oath by these different former KGB agents as being a KGB. Now, beloved, last week, the founder of the KGB had his statue torn down in Moscow. And there's been a tremendous reaction now against the KGB. They've had total control of the churches. They've had total control of these foreign activities. And here comes along the International Council of Christian Churches. In every assembly we had, we passed resolutions about it. We reported these things. And the refugee groups, the groups in the Soviet Union that fought these things. Here's the Ukrainian Baptists. And by the way, the Ukraine just yesterday declared its independence. But the Ukrainian Baptist joins our International Council of Christian Churches. And then you have Paul Voronov, who also was very active. His mother was in prison for 40 years. And he even confronted Gorbachev it was when he came to Washington, rushed in the embassy. In other words, our men and our activity and our resolutions has been against the communist use of the churches. We've been against the KGB using the churches. We've been against it. And I've taken part in these different activities all through these years. Now, the World Council of Churches had their meeting in Australia last February. I was there. And here were all these communist agents. Here they were. The World Council gave to the Russian Orthodox Church delegates representing 50 million Christians in the Soviet Union. They never counted them. Nobody knew they were there. That's what they said. And as a result, they had the largest representation in persons attending the council of any church anywhere. They had a great block there with their hats on, and they were all there. But every single one that came with the okay of the KGB. And it was while they were there in February that we began to see these rumblings and these things taking place. And it's very, very interesting that when they nominated their new Central Committee, they put some of these KGB agents on their committee today. And one of them is Archpriest Borovoy. His name is Borovoy. He was reelected. Borovoy was a Soviet representative who had a headquarters in the WCC meeting in Geneva for years to be their counsel and their representative in handling the affairs of the WCC in Geneva. Borovoy is a very able, very brilliant man. And in 1966, the World Council had a meeting on church and society. That's your political order in Geneva. I was there. I went to it. And Archpriest Borovoy was there. He made a great speech. Nicodim was there. He made a great speech. I got the copy in which Nicodim, who took the place of Nikolai, said that as Borovoy has explained to you that the Christians in our union have accepted the socialist revolution and are builders of the new just social order. That was 66. Well, now Borovoy was reelected in February to this committee again. Here's a man that's been in there all these years, praising communism, representing the Russians, and at that meeting in 1966 in Geneva, he spoke of the need. Here was Angola and Mozambique, these countries. They weren't communist yet, but he spoke of helping them. And then he spoke, of course, of the South African situation. He gave the communist position in the World Council of Churches on these political activities that have been helping the communist cause over the world. That was 1966. Now, beloved, I don't know what they're going to do. But two things have happened just recently, very recently. And that is that the KGB agent in Moscow in charge of religion went over to Geneva. He took with him the Baptist man who was also on the executive committee, who was a KGB agent, Alexei Bichkov. And they went into the World Council of Churches and had a meeting with them and the other church groups, and they outlined to them what they wanted the World Council to do. They had a brief report of that in their own ecumenical press service, which they sent out. And I got it. I thought, oh my, isn't this tremendous? We got the KGB agents sitting in the World Council of Churches headquarters telling them what they're supposed to do. But apparently that wasn't satisfactory, so a couple of issues later, they came out with a full page, a second report on this man's visit, in which he said that he was an atheist. And then he outlined the program that he wanted the World Council of Churches to take. That's going to embarrass him now. It's going to embarrass him now. Here he came in there, and there was Bichkov. Then the other thing that has happened is that the World Council took their Central Committee, that's their big governing body, over to Moscow for their first meeting. They were received by the government. They were taken into the great hall of the palace. You all hear about it. There they were. And the Prime Minister addressed them, representing Gorbachev. And then the Secretary of the World Council gets up and thanks them very much. And he begins to say that he could quote some of the nice pages from Karl Marx, Das Kapital, about the union of mankind in the great world, and that he could take passages from the Bible similar to Marx's passage, and with these two concepts of a world organization, we could work with the communists for many years to come. Now that just happened. Now, beloved, it looks to me like the Russian people have really had enough. They've had enough. Now, when I say the Russian people, I mean all the people. However, you've got to understand the geography of Russia, of the Soviet Union. They have these different provinces. And the largest one, which is larger than the United States in geography, is called Russia. And this man, Boris Yeltsin, has been elected democratically to be their president. And he's the one that housed himself up in their big headquarters there, and he stood, and finally the tanks backed away. And he's more or less being recognized as a hero. But he now has recognized the Balkan states. He now has his own army, and he has enough population, more people in his one province as the United States. And now Gorbachev last night has repudiated the Communist Party. It's the Communist Party that ran everything. It's the Communist Party that set up the KGB, and now the Communist Party, after these 74 years, is in real difficulty. It's disorganized. And with all of this, here comes the World Council of Churches with all their men here in connection with it. And did I ever think it never would come out of my country that we'd have such a repudiation, but it came out of the Soviet Union. The people themselves just won't take it anymore. We've told you over and over again that communism was atheistic, it was materialistic, man has no soul, all he has is a body, and the state's supposed to take care of it. And it hasn't worked. It hasn't worked. Now Gorbachev is in real trouble, as you know today. He made a speech, press conference speech, when he got back from the Crimea where he'd been kept in hand. And in that speech he emphasized that he was going to continue the Communist Party. And when I read it, I said, he's going to have problems. Well, when he appeared before the parliament of the Russian section, that province, they just practically ridiculed him, and both of our papers here indicated that he was submitted to real attacks. And now today he has abolished his relationship to the party, and it's going to be no more. The other thing which he said in that address, and I listened to it, was that he was a socialist. He says, I'm a socialist. He says this is developed in various sections of the world, and he committed himself to it. Now that gave an awful comfort to Fidel Castro when he said, I'm a socialist. It gave a lot of comfort to the men in South Africa that want to make, but he said it. Now he's in trouble over those two remarks. Those two remarks that he made has gotten him into real trouble because Yeltsin is against communism, clearly against communism. And our problem is now they talk about, this free market, the free market, but it's going to have to be a free market under the control of a democratic socialism. And that's where we've come. And that's what the World Council said over in Australia in February when they came out against capitalism and they spoke in favor of a democratic socialism. Now I take my pulpit on this Sunday morning to address you people because here is the issue that we've been involved with all these years, with these ecumenicals promoting communism, with these ecumenicals taking the mission field, and with the World Council of Churches taking in these churches from the Iron Curtain countries which were under the control of communism. Now I must tell you this, and this is good. In Czechoslovakia, all the men who represented the communist state have been thrown out of the state. They've been thrown out. In communist Hungary had men appointed to the church offices by the government. All of them have been thrown out. And an entirely new group of men have been taken in that are anti-communist. And when I was in Australia in February and we were outside there demonstrating, here came a man up to me and he said, Mr. McIntire, I'm from Hungary. I've only been elected here, I guess, 6 weeks, but he says, we threw out all the communists who were in charge of our churches. And he says, I'm glad to be here. He said, give me your material. He came back later, and I gave him a lot of material. Later he came and said, Mr. McIntire, he says, we are sympathetic to you. We have no use for this place, and I'd like to have come to Hungary someday and speak to our people. But Hungary's got rid of communist churchmen. They've thrown them out. Czechoslovakia's got rid of the communist clergy. They've thrown them out. Romania's the same way. They've thrown out these churchmen and put in churchmen that are not communist. Now, into the middle of this, we see these things happening over there. But what are we going to do with the clergy in the United States that are in these churches that have been helping these communists? What what are we going to do with this National Council of Churches that sponsored these men around over here? Got all this favorable publicity in the interest of peace. Well, they ought to be rejected. The same thing ought to happen to them here that's happened to the folks in communist Hungary. It's not communist Hungary anymore, it's Hungary. And these men in the World Council of Churches right now that are going to sit there in their executive committee that were appointed by the KGB and represented the KGB, they ought to be put out. Something's happened in Eastern Europe. I wish it would happen in the United States. But it's not going to happen in the United States unless the people of the United States that love the Lord are going to do something about it. I have said on my radio this week that I think that the Associated Press, through their George Cornell, has been there all these years, ought to apologize to the church people. Why, he's been promoting the World Council, all their activities, all their things, never one word about the ICC having their big meetings. It's all been one-sided. And we have had the liberals in control of the media, feeding the American people this thing that the ecumenicals have had in working with their churchmen from the Iron Curtain countries, and the other side of that picture has not been given to our country. And here I am, a churchman, dealing with these issues all the years. My church has stood with me. We've worked for these great issues, and now something is going to happen. I wish we could have a real uprising, a real blow-up here in the United States. And will anybody take the media and get this story as I've outlined it to you people today? Now, the House Committee on Un-American Activities was dissolved because these ecumenicals wanted, so they put a big ad in the Washington Post. The Senate Internal Security Subcommittee laid these things aside. And for a number of years now, we've had no exposures out of Congress of this communist activity. But you know, I guess it was 2 years ago, to our surprise, the FBI put out a whole statement on the communist use of the churches. And would you believe it? They named Alexei Bitchka. They named the successor of Nicodim and Nikolai, Filaret. Said they were representing the KGB. They named it. I published it in the Christian Beacon. It wasn't even reported in any newspaper that I knew of around here. But finally the FBI came out and for the first time actually said that the World Council of Churches had men in it that were serving the communist cause. Well, thank the Lord the FBI did it, and I was able to use it. Now, this is what I think must be done. And I want your prayers of you people. There's no way in the world that the World Council of Churches can justify having Archpriest Borovoy sit on their council today. He's an agent of the KGB. He's been there all these years. He's sitting there right now. There's no way in the world that they can justify that. And a lot of other things are going to happen. Now, I've talked to some of our ICC men, and what we propose to do is that when the World Council has their meeting of their Central Committee, September the 21st in Geneva, that a delegation of us go over there and present them a petition. One church body go into it with a petition, asking them to expel Borovoy, asking them to clean their own house on this whole communist activity, and support it with an excellent brief that documents all of these things. We've been right in the heart of it. Now, I hope we can do it. And if the Lord leads, we will go over there for a couple of days or so. But we were in Geneva in 1950. We had the ICC Congress there. Beautiful time. But the World Council of Churches now is in a position that the communists put them in it. The communists turned against the whole thing in the Soviet Union. The church has been under the control all these years. And now the World Council of Churches has got in their highest level men operating, accepted, but they're KGB agents. Maybe something can come out of that. But if it doesn't, there's still a few of us in this country that have the documented facts. We had the support of the House Committee and the Senate Committee. The liberals, they removed them. We don't have them anymore. But thank God the FBI did come out and mention these very men that I'm talking about right now in a report as being a part of the communist operation in the use of the churches. Now I want to take this time and give you just this little review, but it's no time for us to walk away from this. It's no time for us to forget it. Now that things have fallen out in such a way, and it took the Russians to do it, that our position is vindicated and verified, it's time for us as God-fearing people to see if we can't get at these religious leaders in the United States who've been featured and they've been used and they've misled the American people. Now let me tell you, I must close, but let me tell you. I read you from the Washington Post the big ad signed by these men to get rid of the House Committee on Un-American Activities. And of course they did. These are the very men representing the very groups that went after a little station called WXUR. The very groups that were on, get rid of the House Committee. We don't want any more things like this coming out, but here's a station who's got a man named McIntire on it, and he's been talking about these things, and we got to get rid of that station. And you know the long 5-year fight we had, and they won. But they had the political influence necessary to kill that station and to silence the voice of Dr. Carl McIntire on these issues. Lord takes His time. The Lord has His way. And the rejection of the Communist Party, the rejection of the KGB, which has just taken place this last week, and which your pastor saw and rejoiced in, has led me to get up and say, wait a minute, the implications and the involvement in these liberal churches of these men who've been helping the communists with their peace offensive and with these other things, they've now come to a head. And somewhere, somehow in my country, I hope the men who helped the communists will be treated the same way they were in the Eastern European countries. They were put out. They were put out. And by the help and grace of God, that could be done. But my country cannot keep quiet, and I cannot keep silent. And our churches must stand up and say the church is no place to receive agents of the KGB and of the Communist Soviet Union and make them officers in your organization. Remember when I got thrown out of Kenya in 1975? You know who it was that put the pressure on the Kenya government to have McIntire thrown out? We're pretty well sure that it was the Soviet embassy and the influence of Nicodem. Just get this man McIntire out. Get this man McIntire out. And now today I've used a Christian pulpit in a Christian country to explain to you people what's going on, and I have the facts perhaps as no one else has them compiled, but I hope the Lord will make it possible for us to go to Geneva after the middle of September and take a petition with a brief to present to the churches that the churches of Jesus Christ, or churches that claim to be Jesus Christ, must clean their house. Get rid of the KGB agents that sit on their powerful committees and give them counsel. Christians, this is an evil. It's a monstrous evil. And it shows you what's happened in the use of the churches by the liberals. May God help us. And may we stand up for our liberty, for our Christianity. For there's no place in Christianity for anything like this. Let us pray. O Lord our God, we thank Thee that the pastor laid aside the sermon he planned to let our people know that we've been misled for 35 years. These KGB agents have been walking our streets. For full 35 years, the media has been promoting them when they came over here, sponsored by the National Council of Churches, and coming also as representing their membership in the World Council of Churches. Thank you, Father, for the way things disrupted in the Soviet Union this past week. Thank you. And we pray now that more of these things will unfold and that we shall be able, together with others, to turn America away from following the liberals with what they've done in these churches to promote the communist peace offensive and the peaceful coexistence with the communists and these things that we've been hearing. God help us. May we not be ashamed of this Christ of ours. For Jesus' sake we ask it all. Amen.